This is the All Pro Wrestling 100 podcast for the week of September 25th, 2019. This is episode 4, and this is All Pro Wrestling and only Pro Wrestling. I'm your host, JB, and in the next hour, I'm going to bring to you highlights of Raw is Wyatt, even though the women carried the program this week. Meanwhile, Sasha is Smackdown. Also, we've got some Impact and Ring of Honor recaps. I'm going to bring you highlights of shoot interviews this week with Triple H and Eli Drake. In our history segment, we're going to talk about women's wrestling and how it's evolved with the current women's evolution. And in our third segment, we will bring you our first All Pro Wrestling 100 female ladies top 10. We'll throw some more depth into our territory booking game. We got all this coming, so let's get right to it. We got some news, rumors, and event recaps. In the future, we hope to have an ad break here. But right now, I promised you at some point we were going to bring you a list of podcasts that you could listen to if you wanted to do what I'm doing. In other words, try to listen to 20 or 25 hours of pro wrestling each week and not hate it. This week we're going to talk about Jason Powell of ProWrestling.net. I'm going to bring you a straight shoot about his content this week, the good and the bad. But the reason we're going to start with him is because he brought to us a broadcast of a Triple H conference call about NXT. Triple H fielded questions from wrestling reporters who are basically dirt sheet writers, who are basically supermarks. He fielded questions about the new NXT on USA. I noticed that conspicuously absent from the entire conference call was the acronym AEW. Yeah, he's not going to put that over, even though this is a war that his father-in-law started. I want you to try to remember in the coming months and maybe years when you all get very spiteful about NXT, because if you're a true wrestling fan, you're going to become spiteful about what Vince is trying to do to this new upstart company with AEW. I want you to try to remember, though, not to blame Hunter for this. Hunter is passionate about NXT because he was given a chance to run a wrestling promotion in an era where he's not going to be given a chance to be the man and hold the strap more than a couple of months every few years. He is on the downside of his career, and he was given this great opportunity in an era where there were all these other free agents competing to run small indie wrestling companies. He was given an opportunity with NXT, and now it's got a time slot, and it's being asked to be an actual wrestling promotion. He has to embrace that. He has to go out and get higher production value. He has to accept help from upstairs with guys who have been on the main roster that get sent down to boost ratings, even if that's not necessarily what's best for the development of talent in NXT. He has to accept all that, and he has to embrace it because this is his project now, and he takes ownership of it like any successful businessman would do. So please don't blame Hunter. You may be excited about the Wednesday Night War and think that NXT on USA is cool, but trust me, it's not going to be cool. And if it hurts Cody's product, you're all going to hate it. And you're going to be talking back in retrospect later, really booing this and burying it to your friends about what a terrible thing it was Vince did to AEW. But meanwhile, just don't blame Hunter. Hunter's doing the best he can with what he's being asked to do by the chairman. In this conference call, Hunter talks about how Vince harassed him increasingly as they got closer to the live airing, even sending text going 20 minutes till you're on live, like he needs that. And then sending opinions about segments during the show that were just completed during commercial breaks, as if Hunter has nothing better to do than sit there. No, don't come to me for advice right now. I can't give you advice on your match. I gotta wait and see if my father-in-law is gonna text me and give me his opinion on what I just did, because I really need his approval. That's what all this is about. No, it's not what it's all about, Vince. Vince, he says that Vince embraces the different perspective of pro wrestling and that we should all give his father-in-law a break and give him some credit because he embraces all of these different views of pro wrestling and all of these different presentation styles that we're currently seeing. He thinks it's great for the business. He thinks not everything can be Monday Night Raw. However, he's blowing up Hunter's phone during a live broadcast, the first live broadcast of a developmental product. That would be like going back in time to the mid-90s and broadcasting Ohio Valley Wrestling when Mark Henry was trying to learn how to press slam somebody without breaking their neck and saying, oh, Mark, you're going to be on TV now competing with WCW. So get on out there. I mean, this is crazy. He's doing the best he can. He's got Vince on his phone and in his ear throughout the whole program. Apparently, during The second hour, which if you recall was pulled off of USA and broadcast exclusively on the network because this whole thing was thrown together in 5 weeks, the network crashed. There was a partial outage in some parts of the country, and tens of thousands of users were unable to even log into their accounts, much less watch NXT. Hunter tried to blow that off and say that wasn't a big deal, that these things happen with the technology, which, to Hunter's credit, that was true in 2013 when this was new technology. Ask me how many people would be subscribing to Netflix right now if every time you tried to watch a new Netflix program, tens of thousands of people had an outage. Hunter says the true fans that watch NXT will watch it anytime. He's probably right. He knows his fans. And then there's the dullards at Full Sail who might never leave those seats. If they just deliver hot dogs and Pepsi to those people at Full Sail, some of them probably live in the arena. You just roll out a cart of hot dogs, complimentary hot dogs, so long as you cheer Johnny Gargano and his wife. Just put over Johnny Gargano, it's all the hot dogs you can eat. People have done more ridiculous things to put asses in seats at pro wrestling events, trust me. Florida fans at Full Sail kind of harken me back to the days. It turns out, I was thinking about this. He put over the Florida fans. He says the Full Sail fans are great and they're a part of We Are NXT. And he means that. He really is NXT. They really are NXT. And it got me to thinking, this is what Eric Bischoff did with Nitro when he was asked to put together a budget on a shoestring. He spent money on talent, but he saved money hosting things in Orlando. I think it was Disney MGM Studio he was using in Orlando. I remember that's where Kevin Nash threw Rey Mysterio like a lawn dart into the side of a trailer, and somebody called the police because they're like, this has to be a crime. This guy's like a giant, and he's got this tiny Mexican. It might be a hate crime, but we're calling the cops. And then the Orlando cops actually came, and they're like, we're looking for a giant who's committing hate crimes on tiny Mexicans. And you got Ric Flair out there who's had like 3 drinks already, and he's screaming. And, every time Rick got excited after 1993, he'd cut himself somehow cutting promos, so he's bleeding out of his mouth. I don't remember if he was actually bleeding out of his mouth, but he always seems to bite the inside of his lip while cutting promos from the 90s on. It's like, Rick, the match hasn't started. The match isn't for 8 days, and you're already bleeding. So anyway, the Florida fans, though, they also carried through TNA. TNA, they had home bases, Nashville, Orlando, spent a lot of time in Orlando. So Florida fans have been carrying pro wrestling as it's trying to get its start and doesn't have the money to do true national tours 365 days a year. It's been Florida fans over the last 25 years that have been helping upstart companies. And it brings back to mind when I lived in Florida for a while, I was blessed to be able to watch ECW on a Florida public access channel called the Sunshine Network. Now, if you're in the South, nationally, we're used to TBS being something that everybody has. And if you know the history, TBS was a local Atlanta station that Ted Turner decided to put on cable channels for the whole country. So everybody got this local Atlanta station. Well, everybody in the southeastern United States at the time, on their local cable, got the Sunshine Network. So it had like a regional influence. And if you lived in Florida, it was your local PBS station. It was just something you could tune in with rabbit ears and watch. So I got to watch ECW at like midnight or 1 in the morning on, I think, Saturday night, Sunday morning. There would be nights my friends and I would come home and we'd been drinking, and you put on ECW on public access. And it was just the greatest thing. And there were never complaints about this violent, bloody thing that's happening, or Ravens crucifying some man on my public access on Sunday morning, and I was looking for a church service, and I got this guy playing Offspring music, and he's crucifying this other bloody man, and this isn't church. No, there was none of that. Because Florida fans love pro wrestling, and they support indie wrestling. And ECW, it would go down to Florida once in a while, but they were up in Philly. They were nowhere near Florida. Florida fans just love pro wrestling, and they love indie pro wrestling. And they remember the days where Ole Anderson would bring guys from Georgia down into Florida, and they taught their kids to love pro wrestling. And Hunter tapped into that. It's not something Vince has, created. Hunter's out there using fans of pro wrestling to try to bring a new pro wrestling product. And whether or not I like NXT, I admire the effort, and it's smart booking centering it down there. Hunter started off. The first good quote we have from Hunter is that NXT will not be changing. And so, we can kind of judge him and grade him on this statement because he goes on 5 minutes later to talk about how there's going to be an influx of talent from 205 Live. 205 Live. Now, I don't watch 205 Live because I have no interest in 205 Live. He's excited about having the young guys on NXT, and Lio Rush is now in NXT, and that's exciting, but Lio Rush wasn't here before, so I would say something's changing. If you're going to be focusing part of your 2-hour program, minus commercials, got to remember the commercials, part of your 2-hour program on cruiserweights now, then something's changing. And Hunter doesn't want to face it or admit it, but if you're going to be competing with another wrestling company with your development territory, a lot's going to be changing. The conference call lasted about a half hour, 35 minutes, and then Jason Powell's broadcast ended. Jason Powell and ProWrestling.net are one of these podcasts that bring you 5 or 6 programs a week. And they don't really focus on keeping each of them an hour. I don't know who has time for that. I've been told that some people just subscribe to a list of podcasts and then they tell their podcast player, whatever method they use, to just play the latest downloads, and it just plays you whatever, and you can rank them. That's not the way I consume podcasts, and I don't want to hear a pro wrestling podcast 5 days a week. You know what else I don't like? I don't like listening to 8 minutes of commercials for a podcast about pro wrestling. I don't care how long it is. Seriously, who are you? Are you the BBC World News podcast? They don't give me 8 minutes of commercials. For real, who are you? 8 minutes. In an interview last week, Jason Powell did with Eli Drake, former Impact Wrestling World Champion, currently NWA talent. They talked about all things pro wrestling. Some of the highlights of the interview. The reason Eli left was basically his contract was coming up and they asked him to do an angle against Tessa Blanchard, which is currently going on with Sami Callihan. Eli Drake said he figured since he hadn't renewed his contract, he didn't have to ask who was going to come out on top of that angle. And as he put it, as tactfully as he could put it, I was just the world champion. So how much sense did it make for me to lose to a 5'4" person of any gender, much less a female? So I passed on that, and then there was no more creative for me, so it was time for me to go. I guess I can understand that. Sami Callihan's the right guy. He's ultra hardcore, but he shows that he's willing to humble himself to get in the ring and have a good match that will put asses in seats. That's what makes a winning pro wrestler. That's what sells t-shirts, folks. But Eli Drake, great talent. He's got the look, he's got the charisma, he's got a bunch of catchphrases, he's funny. Now he's in the NWA. He'll be challenging for the World Championship at some point. Nick Aldis is sitting on top of the throne right now of a wrestling promotion that has no television deal, that has no exposure except part-time through Ring of Honor. Nick Aldis has done more commentating for Ring of Honor than he does defending the NWA World Championship, at least over the last year. So in other news, Billy Corgan has talked about the NWA television deal. He wants it to be a small studio wrestling. He threw the number 170 some odd people. So what comes to mind when I think of that is Glow, the women's league from the 80s. But and currently the Women of Wrestling on Axis. Could be cool though. The WCW Saturday Night that I grew up watching was small studio professional wrestling, and that was basically the evolution of the NWA. So we could jump in the Wayback Machine, go back 30, 35 years, and Billy Corgan's going to pick up right where Tony Schiavone and Dusty Rhodes left off. I love it. I love it. For those of you who want to stalk Billy Corgan, like the guys I talked about on last week's podcast, he appears to be taping programs around the Atlanta area on September 30th and on August 1st. He said that himself. I have no idea if they're at that warehouse and office space where the podcasters from Georgia sent one of their friends down to stalk and harass him. I talked about that on last week's podcast. If you missed that, go check out episode 3. Again, you're listening to the 1-hour, one-stop shop for wrestling podcast that's actually authored by somebody who's not clinically insane. I'm going to listen to the podcast of all those people that are clinically insane, and I'm going to disseminate all their insanity and bring you the small tidbits of logic and of common sense that they use to justify completely irrational acts like stalking Billy Corgan around an office complex in Atlanta. In other news, it's always darkest just before dawn. Impact Wrestling just gets themselves a deal with Access TV, and they find out totally spur of the moment that their TV production company has quit. Not only did they quit, they went to work for AEW. This is unfortunate for Impact. Anybody who's rooting for Impact, they didn't need to deal with this. They went and hired a company out of Nashville, probably somebody that had worked with TNA/Impact Wrestling back from the Jeff Jarrett days. Still, it's demoralizing. Victory Road was just a terrible pay-per-view. So if this production, it's Sullivan Production Company. If they had anything to do with Victory Road, good riddance. Don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out. I know they didn't have anything to do with Victory Road. There's no way that a real production company had anything to do with Victory Road. TNA Impact TV on Pop has been really high production value comparatively to their pay-per-views for a long time. And they might fool you into thinking that they were a major wrestling promotion all this time, even though they had no big names since Vince raided the closet like in 2015 and took the Hardys and EC3 and Bobby Lashley and Rockstar Spud and Jeremy Borash and the pick that Tyrus uses on his mohawk fro, and they took the cameraman.
You are worse than Hulk Hogan.
They took Dixie Carter's lingerie collection.
Are you professional or not?
They took Jeff Jarrett's horse. That was rude. Then they took Karen. Yeah, they blew it all up. They took Karen Angle. That was everybody gets to take.
Oh, good for you.
Everybody gets a turn with Karen Angle. That's rude. That's rude of me. But anyway, since the last time Vince took everything from TNA, they've been having a hard time. So, new TV deal. The worst pay-per-view of all time just happened, and it's over, and it's behind them. Now they lose their production company. Things are looking up, though. Axis knows how to do sports. They know how to do sports entertainment. This is going to be a good partnership for Anthem to put Axis TV and Impact Wrestling together. And finally, we will see a resurgence and some quality from Impact Wrestling. Let's move on. Ring of Honor taping 9/20. You all aware that there's a guy from the Quebecers still wrestling? Pierre Oulet goes by PCO. This guy, I don't know what he did or what these minor league scrubs did to him, but his face just got mangled to the point they couldn't even show it on their Bush League TV that airs in exactly no homes. I don't understand how you manage to put together a 1-hour program once a week, of which 20 minutes are commercials, of which there's never any women's matches. There's like 2 women's matches a month. And so you've got 3 matches a week on TV. They're always taped. And you are featuring a taped match with a 50-something-year-old man, and we can't even see his face. It's blurred through the entire match. Amazing. Just amazing. Ring of Honor, I say it every week. If there's something that can be done wrong in professional wrestling, not only has Ring of Honor done it, they've done it recently. They've probably done it to a greater degree than everybody else in pro wrestling recently. It's crazy. But anyway, if you want to see a blur move around with some red behind it and a 60-year-old guy you used to watch wear tights in the WWF back in the 80s, check out the September 20th Ring of Honor, episode 418. Impact Wrestling Friday night, the 20th, Mexico City one more time. I swear, Impact's going to stay in Mexico for the rest of time. It seems like they've been there for months. OVE versus ECW and Tessa Blanchard. I'm telling you, this is something. It's a callback to last week where we saw Rob Van Dam and Rhino and the American Dreamer, Tommy Dreamer, in there with Tessa Blanchard fighting against all of the state of Ohio. This week, you should watch the match just for this press slam. Madman Fulton, he picks up Tessa, and this was bound to happen eventually if Tessa keeps getting in the ring with men. I'm telling you, the positioning, I want you to picture a 6.5-foot tall guy. He's going to press slam a 5'4" woman. His hand has to go somewhere for the press slam. His hand goes on her chin/throat, which is awkward to look at, and then his other hand goes where, folks? Come on, where does his other hand go? You know where his hand goes. You know where his hand goes. Everybody knows where his hand goes. Let me tell you who knew where his hand was. Tessa Blanchard knew where his hand was. She knew exactly where his hand was. This turns into a flying cutter off the top rope from Jake Christ. So you've got Man Mad Fulton with his hand up inside Tessa Blanchard's, and then Jake Christ jumps off the top rope and literally pulls her head separate from her body. I don't even know what to say. I don't know that it was sexy. Maybe it was sexy. Like I said, Tessa Blanchard is always sexiest woman in the ring when she's in the ring with the ECW guys. It's hard not to be. Tommy Dreamer, he keeps getting bigger. He's going to need a Dusty Rhodes-sized casket if he keeps eating. And Rob Van Dam, he keeps getting older. He gets a little slower every time he rolls with thunder. His rolling thunder rolls a little less powerfully each time. Anyway, Taya Valkyrie and Alicia Edwards had a match. Alicia Edwards is getting better at taking bumps. She still can't wrestle a lick, though. So it's fun to watch Taya dominate a woman half her weight, just throw her around the ring. Remember when Austin Aries referred to Taya Valkyrie as a husky lass? And then he rubbed his belly and licked his lips at her during the world title match? Man, I love Taya, but that was a moment. Mahabali Shira is back from India. He's put on more muscle. He's still not totally trimmed down to the point Vince McMahon will get aroused by him, so you know he's not on his way to the WWE yet. Still, he's trimmed down, looks good from his last stint over in India. I'm not sure if he's a full-time Indian professional wrestler who's a part-time Impact guy, or vice versa. Maybe he's just splitting his time between the US and India, trying to make the most of it. Tenille Dashwood gave an interview where she was able to keep her eyes open and focus. Of course, it was pre-taped, so who knows? To get that 5 minutes of footage, they may have needed to work with her for 45 minutes. But I'll tell you, in that match in Mexico City last week that they aired, she was about to fall asleep in the middle of her debut. And I was not that impressed with this promo. It's all about me, me, me. I've been listening to you say that since you told Vince you didn't want to be blonde anymore. Or, you wanted to wear your metallic lipstick rather than put on a dress. So I really don't want to hear it, Emma. I want to see you give a good match. For real. I want to see you give a good match where you make somebody else look good. Because part of the reason they let her go is she didn't want to put Ronda Rousey over in like a 2-minute match. So she worked too hard against Ronda and the match lasted too long. So they're like, let's try this again, we'll send you out again. And then she refused to do it twice. So you refuse to be a sex symbol. You refuse to be a jobber. You refuse to do a job for an MMA world champion. And now you're going to fall asleep in your Impact debut. Like I said, we're going to see a match soon where she gets in the ring with Taya. And Taya works stiff. So if Tenille falls asleep, Taya will knock the hell out of her. Havoc versus Su Yung, Part 2, rematch of last week's awesome match. If you missed my coverage and my recap of the Jessica Havoc versus Su Yung match last week, you need to go back and listen just for my coverage of that match. That match was something. This was also very good. Havoc wins via tombstone piledriver. The fighting continues backstage. Havoc hangs Su Yung from a second-floor stairwell. Su Yung is taken out on a stretcher and declared dead, and at the end of the program, her corpse comes back to life. I'm not kidding. This is the Jeremy Borash-style promo that they were working on Impact a few years ago that, Bray Wyatt was talking about, that Matt Hardy was doing. It caught the attention of everybody in the WWE that the backstage and off-site promos that Impact was doing with Jeremy Borash and some guys in the back were more creative and more entertaining than most of the product in the ring. I know this sounds ridiculous if you didn't see it, but Su Young's corpse coming back from the dead actually makes perfect sense with what you've seen in these storylines for the last 2 years. So Su Yung and Jessica Havoc, definitely worth watching if you get a chance. Monday Night Raw, welcome to Raw is Wyatt. We had references to Bray Wyatt and short little promos for both The Fiend and the Firefly Funhouse throughout all of Raw. Opening segment tonight sets up Seth Rollins versus Braun Strowman in the main event.
What don't you get about it?
I don't really understand why it's never a big deal to see Braun Strowman in the ring and why nobody notices anymore that he does nothing but lose. The club jobbed to the Viking Raiders. That's terrible. Moving on, Rusev squashes EC3. And again, that's terrible. And that's really terrible. EC3 is a huge talent. He's great on the mic. He's got a good look. He's got the body Vince McMahon loves. And he was a world champion in another company. And that is the reason why he's getting buried. And it's just so sad. For those of you that don't know, EC3 is a moniker for Ethan Carter III. It's not a real name. This guy wrestled probably under his real name for WWE in their development territory back in the day. And I think he got squashed a few times on a couple of the main cards before getting released. And he took on a character of Dixie Carter's nephew. It was a character, and it got over. And he was a multi-time world champion. And so he came in with that character, EC3. He's not on NXT promoting that he's Dixie's nephew, but that doesn't matter. I think Hunter treated him fairly. He jobbed him twice. EC3 won 2 or 3 matches down there, but he didn't make him look foolish. Up on the main roster, whoever's doing the booking for Raw has made him look foolish, and it's Vince, and it's Vince's mandate, and Paul's carrying it on because Paul's going to choose his battles, and EC3's not one of Paul's battles right now. I think it's terrible, though. It's a mistake. You have to make the most of the assets you have. And if you have a company that's out there competing right now, whether you like it or not, Impact is a competitor, and you have one of their all-time great world champions, you should make use of that, not job him to everybody. Rusev's mustache pinned EC3 this week. That's terrible. Come on. Sasha Banks versus Nikki Cross, match of the night. This was the wrestling match of the night. These two put on a clinic, and it was amazing. I'm serious. If you didn't see this, see if the WWE Network posted it online. The entire thing. It's great. It's like 15 or 20 minutes. A great technical wrestling match. Nikki Cross is a wrestler. I'm serious. She's a wrestler. Heel Bailey and Quiet Alexa were at ringside. Quiet Alexa's interesting. I don't know if they just took the mic away from her or if this is a new part of her character, but she drinks more coffee than she does cut promos now. I like it. She's hot. It's fun seeing her at ringside, and she gets big pops when she beats up Heel Bailey, so that's all right. Sasha wins the match because, she's on a big run right now, even though she's only been back for like 12 minutes. Next week is the season premiere of Monday Night Raw. That only matters to Vince McMahon and the network. I mean, this is a 365-day-a-year business. It's not Homeland. We put out more than 12 episodes every 2.5 years, guys. So the season premiere doesn't mean anything to anybody, but it'll mean a payday for Brock, because Brock's showing up. I don't know, The Miz had another baby, did you hear? And at 4 days old, the baby is already more fluent in both English and French than its mother, Maurice.
Because you suck.
I have no idea how a woman who's been on a major television show for over a decade still has so little command of the English language. I'm a little bit behind on Total Divas right now. I'm about 6 years back, about 6 years behind. I figure I'll be caught up about 2025, 2026. I hope by then Maurice has learned to speak one language, semi-fluently, possibly. And as far as Miz and Mrs. goes, I do plan to watch at about the time the first kid goes to college, because I have other things to do in my life than watch The Miz and his barely intelligible wife pop out more children. Lacey Evans versus Ember Moon. This was a candidate for match of the night. It was stiff and it was sexy. Lacey Evans wins. Going to further propagate the feud of Lacey Evans versus Natty. As Corey Graves and I have been telling you for weeks now, Natty is a nasty. So Lacey wins this one by a sharpshooter. Ember Moon is going to be sexy when she stops being a cave woman. I'm going to enjoy her a whole lot more then. Firefly Funhouse, Bray Wyatt breaks a Seth Rollins action figure in half, and he says some nonsense that I interpreted to mean he was going to be picking on Braun Strowman sometime. Carmella soft swerve R-Truth and everybody else who wasn't paying attention to win the 24/7 title. This was a good call, I think. I enjoy it. Yeah, there we go. The people like it. I would like to see the women have a mid-card title, and if they can't have their own mid-card title, like a women's Intercontinental title or a women's North American title maybe, if the NXT women's title isn't going to be something that we can see on Raw, then I think maybe the 24/7 title should be something that we can have the women compete for until Nia Jax comes and beats them. And then, of course, we get to watch men beat up Nia Jax, like Randy Orton at the Royal Rumble, and everybody cheers. Because in WWE, it's not okay to beat up women unless they're Nia Jax. King Corbin versus Sad Chad Gable in the rematch that everybody didn't care about. Wanted to see. This was the King of the Ring Finals rematch that ends with a disqualification. Sad Chad wins. That's cool. I don't know where Sad Chad goes from here. The AOP, the Authors of Pain, cut another promo wearing suits and then assaulted some scrubs in a hallway to show that they are serious and mean business. Main event Fatal 5-Way for a world title spot next week. Ricochet, AJ Styles, Bobby Roode, Rey Mysterio, Shinsuke Nakamura. I love how these 5 guys fight each other to get a title shot next week, but Braun Strowman's fighting Seth Rollins later in the program, and it's not for the title. So there's never even talk of what if Braun wins, because it doesn't matter. It's another non-title match. Braun doesn't get to be world champion, but we're supposed to believe that whoever wins this match might be. AJ and Bobby Roode got some TNA chants. That was pretty cool. I enjoyed that. Rey Mysterio wins. If you're as amazed as I was when Rey first came back, then was pushed to the moon in the overseas events, was given a title, got a win over Samoa Joe, got a match at WrestleMania, he's on billboards advertising for the new Smackdown on Fox, I have a feeling Rey Mysterio's got name notoriety to people who might not watch wrestling anymore. They grew up watching Rey Mysterio Jr. on Nitro. They know he's talented, and they're excited to see somebody they recognize stand next to Becky Lynch and Roman Reigns on a SmackDown billboard. I get that, which, if that's the case, Rey will be gone a year from now. As for now, Rey Mysterio wins, and he gets a title shot next week against Seth Rollins. Main event of Monday Night Raw, Seth Rollins and Braun Strowman, and as you probably can imagine, it ends with the lights going out, the Fiend comes out, the Fiend Bray Wyatt attacks Braun Strowman and puts him down with the mandible claw. Now, in the story the match was telling, Braun was dominating Seth, and every time Seth would try to get the better of him, he'd use his force to put Seth down. So Seth is kind of laying in the corner. Braun was looking like he was about to get over, and the Fiend comes out now. Both of them are down. Here's the thing I have a problem with. Seth, for the second week in a row, is laying in the corner with his lip quivering, being a baby, and I'm confused as to whether I'm seeing sexual role play between him and his girlfriend, Becky the Man, or am I seeing him react to the Fiend Bray Wyatt come out? I'm not sure. And he doesn't act like a man anymore, so I'm not sure who's acting like a man. I'll tell you, in the ring, he wasn't acting like a man. He's a crying little baby. He's a crying little baby doing little baby things. And the Fiend Bray Wyatt comes over and he makes faces and Seth's lip quivers. I don't even know what this is. We're going to move on. Smackdown. September 24th, Eric Rowan comes out, cuts a good promo despite being booed by the disrespectful fans. Daniel Bryan comes out as an irrational babyface turn. He's apparently been getting cheered at house shows, and they've allowed him to do his yes chant, and they've put him against heels, but then he's got to come out on TV and play a heel and get booed. So now he's actually going to be consistent at house shows and on television, playing the irrational babyface character who goes out and gets squashed by bigger guys all the time. We've seen Daniel play this before. It works for him. Later, Carmella and Charlotte Flair with their new tag team face Sasha Banks and Bayley. Great match. Sasha, of course, has to win, and she taps out Carmella because Sasha's on this hot streak. You know how it is. Becky the Man still can't execute a back kick, and it's starting to get embarrassing. For real, you're a women's champion. You've held the belt. You won at WrestleMania. You beat Ronda Rousey, and you can't kick backwards higher than somebody's groin. Asuka and Kairi Singh actually get a victory against Mandy Rose and Sonya Deville. Are they the Kabuki Warriors? They had some other name they liked, and Vince took it away from them. I really liked Asuka back in the day. I was even convinced there was some favoritism being shown towards Asuka from definitely Hunter and the NXT staff, and then probably all of the bookers up on the main programs, the way she kept that undefeated streak going. But I quickly changed my mind when they began jobbing her to just about everybody. And now I kind of feel bad for her. She's saddled with this terrible Kabuki gimmick with Kairi Singh. I don't like Kairi Singh. Never liked the pirate gimmick or the boat wheel she'd come out with or the puffy shirt. Don't understand. She's got the telescope and the eye patch and the peg leg and the hook. I don't understand what it's all about. But they got a victory tonight. I'm a lot less sympathetic now just because I feel like these are cookie cutter cutouts of Japanese female wrestlers. And now that I've had a chance to see Shida Hikaru and Mayu Iwatani, I like the other versions of Asian female wrestlers that the WWE has tried to assimilate gimmickry from. If you look at Asuka and Kairi's outfits, they're kind of piecemealed together of different themes of different Asian female wrestlers' outfits from all these different promotions. The problem is Asuka can't speak English and Kairi can't speak English, so unless they're clearly better and more attractive and have better gimmicks than all these other Asian female wrestlers, why am I watching them? Especially when you're giving them terrible gimmicks like from the 1980s and, they're carrying boat wheels to the rings with them. I don't want to watch the Viking Raiders and I don't want to watch the Kabuki Warriors. But they got a victory tonight, which probably means that they're going to end up winning the women's tag team titles at some point. They're going to pass those belts around. I'd like to see Carmella and Charlotte get them. I'd like to see the Iconics have a few runs, and I'd like to see the Bella Twins return at least one more time and hold those belts for quite some time because they've earned it for everything they did for women's wrestling. Owens and Shane cut a promo together. Owens refuses to settle his lawsuit against Shane, and then Shane's mic cuts out from a production error before the promo ends. I don't understand how that happens in 2019. Somebody dropped the ball. I hope Eric Bischoff takes care of that. That's no good. Backstage for the main event, Sasha and Becky put over a temporary fence on wheels. Just last month, Becky was getting over on Baron Corbin at pay-per-views, but now this temporary fence on wheels is just too much for her. It's alright though. Listen, in the era where NXT was a development territory on a Tuesday, and then was a primetime show on a Wednesday. WWE's always looking for new talent. It turns out that the Starrcade shows that nobody's allowed to see, yeah, they're going to air in Greensboro this year, and Arn Anderson is going to face off against this temporary fence on wheels in the main event at Starrcade. So nobody will see it except 8,000 people in Greensboro because the network doesn't want to put over Starrcade. But it'll put over this temporary fence against a woman that we're to believe can beat every other woman and half the men on the roster, and who's been pegging Seth Rollins now for 6 months, let's just be honest.
Is that supposed to be sexy?
I'm not entirely sure, but one way or another, they rolled around on the ground and they moaned and they writhed, and I forgot for a moment what I was looking at, but then the WWE logo came on and reminded me that Smackdown had just ended with this fence getting over. Of course, the purpose of the fence is to throw back to the Hell in the Cell pay-per-view where these two ladies are going to fight each other inside a cage. We're going to move into our second segment now this week. We are going to try to find out what quantifies a top female professional wrestler. So tonight, here we go. For the first time, the All Pro Wrestling 100's top female entertainers in professional wrestling. We've got a list. Now, we can't give you the list in order, but we can give you tiers. And we'll even throw in a few of my favorites at the end to round it out. Now, the reason I can't give you an order is there is no definitive answer as to who the greatest professional wrestler is. That's all opinion. But we can quantify using numbers in certain categories and find out which women come out on top. So I can't tell you which woman is the best, but I can tell you which women in these categories end up scoring the highest and tying for the top level. In the past, it seemed all Vince was really looking for was a particular look. The look had to be about the same for every woman. You needed to be a blonde with certain exaggerated assets, and you needed to find a way to stand out amongst a bunch of similar women. And that's why we had a lot of bra and panties matches. It was based on attractiveness. You didn't have to have a whole lot of promo ability, but if you could cut a little bit of a promo, you'd get more mic time. But you had to look good standing next to a guy. You had to look good, say, getting on your knees and kissing Vince's bare ass in the middle of a ring like Trish Stratus did. And don't forget, Vince didn't make a whole lot of these girls from back in the Attitude Era. You know, Trish Stratus, yeah, she was a fitness model, I believe, whatever that means, who came into the WWF, but Stacy Keibler was a Nitro girl. Tori Wilson was a Nitro girl. Lita was an ECW girl who wrestled down in AAA Mexico as a teenager, so Vince didn't make most of these girls who ended up carrying around a Divas title or whatever it was called at the time. He acquired them from other places where they'd made names, and he threw them in rings with blondes with exaggerated assets and bra and panty matches, or put them next to guys, or wrote them in storylines where they got sexually assaulted by Kane, and at the end of the day, you had a women's division. And Vince was fine with that, and I think wrestling fans were fine with that, but that was a different time, and we fast forward now, it's been 25 years, and we have a whole different women's professional wrestling presentation. And it's no longer about being a blonde with exaggerated assets who needs to somehow find a way to stand out in the ring against a bunch of other blondes. It's not that way anymore. So along with the differences in the types of women that are being featured in the WWE and in women's pro wrestling in general, there's a difference in the actual presentation. It used to be that the women's title was a gimmick title that you might see 4 times a year on pay-per-views, and it would open the cards. Medusa, Alundra Blaze, was never a regular appearance on any television program for WCW or the WWF. But she was a women's champion in both companies, and it was more of a gimmick. They'd start a pay-per-view with Medusa versus an Asian female superstar who you were never going to see again on American television. Now, the women's titles and women's wrestling in general, their storylines are just as important as the men, and they're carrying 30 to 40% of the program each week. And as far as the pay-per-views go, they spend 6 months building a female storyline, and I care more about it than Roman Reigns getting hit by a car and 6 weeks later he fights Eric Rowan. You can put together a women's storyline on television and through social media that stretches, and then at the pay-per-views, a lot of times people have more interest in that women's storyline than whatever transitional storyline a male superstar will be going through now on his way to the next stage in his development. It used to be back in the 80s, it was all male-driven storylines with a couple of women as valets and one match early on. It's not that way anymore. You got Ronda Rousey and Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch supposedly headlining WrestleMania. Every WrestleMania has 3 main events now. I don't know when that started. I think it started about the time CM Punk was champion. because Triple H and Vince didn't want to book CM Punk as the man, so there'd be a double main event. Probably go back and find the origin of that, and it would be around the time CM Punk was champion, but now there's 3 main events to every WrestleMania. Still, the women are booked way higher on cards than they ever were even 2 years ago. So this is an evolution in both the type of females that are being featured, but the number of females and their importance to pro wrestling in general. We're about to see an era where female free agents matter. I mean, thought experiment and a hypothetical. Can you imagine a world where Charlotte Flair and her daddy end up cutting promos for AEW? It could happen. Keep in mind, women's wrestling, this new landscape, it's entirely new. We've never seen free agency be an issue before. We may in the future. Before I get too bogged down with women's pro wrestling history here, I'll just put over a couple of matches. I have a private collection of matches that I've clipped from pay-per-views and digital downloads that I put together by date and I call a pro wrestling history collection. So when I see a match that I think is relevant to the history of pro wrestling, or that is a great match, I clip it, I put the date on it, drop it in a file. The first women's match I have features Sherry Martel, scary Sherry Martel. She was a valet, she was a wrestler, wrestled all over the place for everybody. She was famous for being the Macho Man Randy Savage's valet, but at this point she was in Super Clash 3, I believe, for the AWA. AWA was a Northern Territory in Minnesota. Pretty much everybody went through there. Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff got a start there. It's run by Vern Gagne. And he put this pay-per-view on. The AWA was at the forefront of pay-per-views. And he held this pay-per-view event in a baseball stadium. And so you got these 2 women rolling around in one-piece bikinis and leggings and tights in a ring inside of a baseball diamond with fans really far away from the action, where they got to walk a really long way to get to an interview and then an even longer way to get to a baseball dugout so they can eventually get off camera. It was awkward, it was uncomfortable, but they rolled around for 18 minutes and had an AWA Women's Championship match, and it was the first women's match that I've clipped and said, this is a good match and it's important to wrestling history. And it's amazing how far we've come from that terrible match at the beginning of a 4-hour pay-per-view during daylight hours in an empty baseball stadium. Yeah, the guy sold like 6,000 tickets to an event that held 60,000 people. No matter, he could have sold 30,000 tickets and that baseball stadium still would have looked empty. We learned a lot about holding events and how to put on a good show and make a crowd look good in the time since Vern Gagne held Super Clash 3. I believe it was Super Clash 3, something for you nerds to look up. Scary Sherry Martel and a Super Clash in a baseball stadium, rolling around with some blonde lady in a one-piece. And if you want to look into Scary Sherry's history, check out the WrestleMania. When she came out with Randy Savage, they were working heel, and she had this dress on that was cut just below her hoo-ha, and if you were in the front 5 rows, I swear you got a sex education class along with your WrestleMania ticket that year. Imagine you're in a family of 5. You've got your daughter and your 2 sons, and a mom and a dad who are barely getting along. You know, they're barely holding on. Dad took a job, making more money, and now he never sees mom. And mom's, saddled with the kids and all the responsibilities. And she used to have a career, but now she's put her life on hold. So these 2, they haven't had sex in a year and a half. They've got these 3 kids, and they decide they're going to WrestleMania to spend some of this new family money. And you've got Sherry Martel's vagina in your face and in your children's face for 20 minutes in a 5-hour event. You're halfway through a 5-hour event. So this undersexed dad and, the 12-year-old son and the 15-year-old son and the 8-year-old girl and the angry wife, they're all staring at Sherry Martel's vagina for 20 minutes. And then they have to sit there together and pretend they didn't see it for another 2.5 hours afterwards. And watch Hulk Hogan flex probably at the end of the night for 20 minutes. Even after the match is over, all you want to do is leave. But you're in the front 5 rows, so you're not getting out. You're sitting there till everybody behind you gets out. And Hogan just won't quit flexing. That guy would never quit flexing. I don't actually know if Hogan was at this event. I assume he was. I know it was a WrestleMania. It had Randy Savage. Here's another research project for you nerds. Go look for the WrestleMania where Sherry Martel's vagina is hanging out throughout the entire Randy Savage match. You can tell me they worked heel all you want. I'm telling you, I left happy. That's all I'm saying. So let's move into our third segment now. We're going to talk about women's pro wrestling rankings in 2019 and what that entails. Got my Tonight Show band here. So obviously we have evolved past Women in one-piece bikinis rolling around in baseball diamonds awkwardly, with a lot of headlocks. We believe we've moved past bra and panties matches. In the coming weeks, I'm going to point out some things to make you question that. We have added integrity, though, to women's wrestling over the last 2 years. So let's talk about some categories if we're going to use to evaluate who the top women's wrestlers in the world are right now. Here's what we're going to have to be talking about. First of all, whether we like it or not, looks and attractiveness is the primary category, because that's the primary basis that the people making the decisions on who gets on television and who gets featured in pay-per-views, that's what they're using. It's the look and it's the attractiveness. We're going to make that a category. Most girls are going to get in there on my scale. Most girls are going to get considered there. It's not about having a perfect runway body. It's about having a good look and being an attractive person. I think most of the girls we see featured on most television programs, they fall into that category. So our next category we're going to give credit to is gimmick and character. If you have an outstanding gimmick or character, you're getting put in here. If you are Alicia Edwards, for instance, on Impact, and you have no gimmick, and you have no character, and I question whether you can read every time you cut a promo, seriously, what is wrong with this girl? Don't boo me on that. You, Chuck, you know you've seen Alicia Edwards. We've talked about this. They get louder and louder. Okay. That's Chuck's way of saying that I'm getting out of hand. I'm going to get sued. Remember, the things said on podcasts last forever, folks. Alicia Edwards in 2019 has very little talent. That's what I'm saying. So if you got a good gimmick and a good character, you're going to get credit for that on my rating scale that I've come up with. Ability and athleticism. Charlotte Flair doing her corkscrew moonsault off the top rope onto the floor. That's called athletic ability in female pro wrestling. That's the bar we're setting. Okay? There aren't a whole lot of girls that I'm giving credit in that category. I'm not giving a whole lot of credit there because not everybody does corkscrew moonsaults off the top rope onto the floor. Finally, promo ability, I've given even fewer people credit on, and I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to go through who I put in every category here, who I gave credit to, because I'll get emails for forever about people I left off a list in 2019. But as far as promo ability goes in 2019, people that you're going to stop your DVR from fast forwarding when you see cutting a promo backstage, here's what I've got. Alexa Bliss, Charlotte Flair, Rosemary, Zelina Vega, Taya Valkyrie, and Maria Kanellis. You can argue all day and add your favorite female wrestler in there, but your favorite female wrestler, if she's not on this list, she's not as good at cutting promos as Maria Kanellis. You may not know what Maria Kanellis can do, because you've never seen the First Lady of Professional Wrestling do her thing, but Maria Kanellis is the bar by which I'm setting women's promo ability. Charlotte Flair's good. Alexa Bliss is good. That's why they gave Alexa a little talk show. And Alexa's great on the mic. Rosemary cuts great promos, and she's got a cool gimmick, and it's hard to cut heel promos when everybody loves you and you're doing this weird gimmicky thing. Not a whole lot of people have been able to pull that off. The Undertaker's been able to pull it off, but even The Undertaker, for a while he rode a motorcycle and he rolled around a Limp Bizkit, and I questioned, well, his sanity and his manhood during that time. I don't know.
Is that supposed to be sexy?
It was not sexy, and all I remember is just staring at the TV going, dude, you gotta get the out of here with all of that, because that is just ridiculous. But Rosemary, she does a good job of playing her gimmick, selling calendars and pictures of her and Allie, even though they don't work together anymore on social media. But you gotta have good promo ability to be able to play a gimmicky character like that and not come off like a cartoon. And that's a lot of the reason that the 80s characters in the WWE just never resonated with me and a lot of fans of Southern pro wrestling in general, because they were cartoon characters who got in front of a microphone and just looked like bad actors with flamboyant costumes. And that's not what you want pro wrestling to be. Not in any era. Not in the 80s and not in 2019. Rosemary does a great job of, she paints her face, she plays this heel character. She's been using third-person plural pronouns to refer to herself since way before that was something that we were required to do in order not to offend people. She's been doing the we, our thing, referring to herself and the demons that possess her and whatnot. And she stayed consistent with this gimmick and the face paint and the heel gimmick, even though it's been over. She stayed consistent with this thing for 4 years now, nonstop. There was never a break where she came out with Limp Bizkit and joined a biker gang and tried out for the cast of Sons of Anarchy. That never happened to Rosemary. This is a good character who cuts promos because it's kind of required. This gimmick would never work without promo ability. And as far as women's pro wrestling and the entire landscape go, Rosemary is definitely in the top 10 of people that you can, as a company and as a booker, put out there for 5 minutes with a microphone in her hand and let her go, because she's great. As far as the rest of the list goes, Taya Valkyrie, longest reigning Impact champion in history, so I'm obviously not the only one that thinks that this girl can cut a promo. She's great. And she's a heel right now. She started out as a babyface. She started out as a Viking. And don't even get me started on Vikings. You all know what I think about that. We're just going to move on. Selena Vega, she settled with a guy that can't speak English, but that's given her a chance to get featured on Monday Night Raw way more often than she would have, being that she wears 4-inch heels and she's still only 5'3". It's a tiny little Selena Vega. I'm pretty sure that if you buy enough merchandise from the WWE shop.com, you might find Selena Vega in the bottom of your box because she's that small. So she gets a chance right now, because of her promo ability, to get featured on Raw way ahead of the card for a lot of people that you all buy t-shirts and mark out to. When's the last time you saw Finn Balor on Monday Night Raw? When's the last time you saw Luke Harper on Monday Night Raw? When's the last time you saw Curtis Hawkins or I Got Kids on Monday Night Raw? But hey, you're seeing Zelina Vega on Smackdown and Raw on the regular, getting mic time, a microphone in her hand, regularly. Yeah, that's unusual, so don't argue with me about it. I don't want a bunch of negative emails about how could you include Zelina Vega above X. Everybody working backstage agrees and knows what I'm telling you right now. So for the promo ability category, we have Alexa Bliss, Charlotte Flair, Rosemary, Zelina Vega, Taya Valkyrie, and Maria Kanellis. Plus or minus 1 or 2 people I might have overlooked, but that's what you have right now. That is going to mean that we have about 12 people that score in multiple categories. That's it. So this becomes a whole lot more simple than we thought it was going to be. 12 people. We're going to go through this list. The only person that scored in all 4 categories on my All Pro Wrestling 100 podcast list is Charlotte Flair. And so I hope that you all applaud that. The company's given her like 35 titles already. Charlotte Flair is a 37-time World Heavyweight Champion. So everybody congratulate her on yet another accolade. She is the All Pro Wrestling 100 podcast's top-ranked female wrestler. Next on the list, Sasha Banks. She has everything but promo ability. Now, everyone else on this list scored in 2 categories, and I'm not going to go through what 2 categories they scored in. I recommend you all do this at home. For those of you that are you feel your blood pressure rising as I talk right now, great. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to provoke thought, bring you information. You don't have to agree with me. Make your own list. This is how you do it. Take some categories, assign some values, and rate the girls you like and the ones you don't like. My girlfriend and I, we made a list of every female pro wrestler we could think of that deserved to be considered on this list. We came up with these 12. Okay, and that's it. So here is the remaining list of 8 women who finished in 2 categories, and then 3 women who came real close or that I like a lot. We're going to put these through now in no particular order because remember, we're not actually ranking them. We're just telling you who scores in categories that matter for today's women's pro wrestling. We have in 2 categories Alexa Bliss, Rosemary from Impact Wrestling, Taya Valkyrie from AAA and Impact Wrestling, Nikki Cross from WWE, Scarlett Bordeaux, I don't even know where she is right now, but she's awesome. Allie Bunny, who is now in AEW, formerly with Impact Wrestling. I hate the fact that Allie is on this list, by the way, but she is. Lacey Evans, shocking, Lacey Evans on the list. And Desiderata, who showed up out of nowhere the week before Victory Road and really impressed me at Victory Road, and she ended up on the list because she was on my mind. Liv Morgan would have ended up on the list, but she's out injured right now. I know some of you are like cringing because you haven't heard names like Bayley. Here are 2 girls that are my favorites, among my favorites who did not make the list. Kelly Klein, Women of Honor. I love Kelly Klein. I just want to give her a big hug every time I see her. Shida Hikaru or Hikaru Shida. I wish she would be clear about which she wants to be called. On Instagram, she's both, so I never really know which to call her, but she's the AEW. I really like her a lot. So one more time, I've told you all to make your own list and get a pen and paper, and some of you've had a stroke listening to my list. It's given you a stroke, but with the one good arm you have left, you're frantically writing a list of names. Before you do, let's go through one more time. 4 categories. Look/attractiveness. Number 2, gimmick/character. Number 3, athletic ability. And number 4, promo ability. My list is Charlotte Flair, Alexa Bliss, Sasha Banks, Rosemary, Taya Valkyrie, Nikki Cross, Scarlett Bordeaux, Ali Bunny, Lacey Evans, Desiderata, and if I could, I would include Kelly Klein and Hikaru Shida. When you go ahead and make your list, and you want to tell everybody how Bayley belongs on a list of the top female performers in sports entertainment, explain to me how Bayley can be there with no depth to her character, with no sexuality to her look. She won't even wear symmetrical pants because she's afraid somebody will notice that she has the best ass in all of the WWE Women's Division. Bayley has, hands down, the best ass in the entire Women's Division, and she won't even she wears pants with asymmetrical patterns so that nobody will notice. I don't understand. There's no depth to her character, and until she open mouth kisses Sasha Banks, there's not going to be any depth to her character.
Let's do this.
Indeed.
Let's do this.
Absolutely, let's do this.
Let's do this.
Sasha Banks has been saying it with her eyes for quite some time. I think everybody's waiting for it.
Let's do this.
I'm waiting for it. Sasha Banks, she stares longingly into Bayley's eyes, and she says, I just totally want to... And Bayley won't even wear pants with a symmetrical pattern so that we can admire her body. So don't tell me that Bayley, who smiles and hugs and can't swing a chair as a heel, no, okay, heel Bayley could have some depth if she can learn how to swing a chair. Right now she looks like she belongs wearing a helmet. Don't boo me, boo the chair shot. You all saw the chair shots. Excuse me, pardon me. Tap, tap. Tap, tap. I'm just gonna tap you on the shoulder with this chair. It was the worst. The look of intense longing that Sasha gave Bayley hit harder than the chair shots did that night. So, move past that. Make your own lists, post them online. We'll wrap things up tonight by taking another look at our wrestling territory thought experiment. We all made rosters a few weeks ago. We've had some changes. We've set some rules out, made things difficult for you with your wrestling territory. Some of you have some empty roster spots. I know I do. So we're going to work out some arbitration issues. If you recall, I lost John Cena. My girlfriend lost John Cena because we both chose John Cena, so neither of us get John Cena. And the way the rule works out is, no matter where you chose somebody, if another person you're playing with also chose them, you lose them to arbitration. So, we're going to work this out now. You got an empty roster spot, whatever it might be. You're going to write down a name to fill that roster spot in secret. In 15 minutes from now, you're going to compare, or next week if you're playing against me and my girlfriend, you're going to compare the name you write in for your roster spot. Now, if you really want John Cena, or if I really want John Cena, or whoever it is you lost, you write their name down again. But just keep in mind, you're playing against people who also have the option of writing that name down again. And if you both choose the same person again, you're going to lose them to another round of arbitration where they will sit at home, probably get paid something, and you won't have access to either your talent or your roster spot. It becomes a matter of how bad do you want this. Now, if you had an empty roster spot for your city or your pay-per-view, nothing changes. There's no arbitration. It's harder to work out a TV deal. It's harder to work out a pay-per-view deal. It's harder to get an arena deal for a 9-month contract on Sunday mornings or whenever you choose to do your tapings. It's hard to get studio time if you're going to do small studio. So if you lose the space or you lose the pay-per-view, it's going to take you longer to work that out. That's just the way it is. Let's work in something we touched on last week, the babyface and the super heel. I told you to designate one of your guys as a babyface and one of your guys as a super heel. Well, now I'm going to tell you that you've chosen that. I told you to mark them with an asterisk. And now I want you to build into the way you're booking that these guys now have reasonable creative control over their characters. And to anybody that knows the history of pro wrestling, if you're, say, Eric Bischoff, and you're in a ratings war, and you're willing to do anything back in the 1990s to get ahead of your competition, and you come up with the idea of handing reasonable creative control to somebody, you just don't do it. Just don't ever do that. No matter what you're thinking, don't ever do that, because it never works out well for you, never works out well for the company that you're working for. So your super heel and your baby face now have reasonable creative control. If you know the history of pro wrestling, you know how murky that water is. So if you don't know what that means, yeah, welcome to pro wrestling. Nobody knows what that means. What it means is Bash at the Beach 2000, Hulk Hogan, Jeff Jarrett. If you're not aware of what went on, I'm not talking about 96. This is well past the NWO. Look into Vince Russo, Eric Bischoff, Hulk Hogan, Jeff Jarrett, Booker T. And look into what happened at Bash on the Beach 2000. You can go listen to Eric Bischoff and Conrad Thompson's podcast about it. They talk about it for 2.5 hours. It's very enlightening. Don't listen. I don't recommend listening to Vince Russo's tales about it. He's very animated, very emotional, says a lot of bad things about a lot of people, and really doesn't provide you any insight. Like a lot of Vince Russo's rants, he doesn't actually provide you a whole lot of insight. And that's not my opinion. That's just a fact. He'll give you insight into Vince Russo's mind. If you want real insight, go tune into Conrad Thompson and Eric Bischoff talk about this at length. It's quite interesting, the story that happened there. And it's all based around a small clause in somebody's contract called creative control. Some of you are probably locked on to the description of this as a game. This is a thought experiment. It's a philosophic thought experiment where you put yourself in the shoes of another person or in another situation you haven't been in, and you close your eyes and you try to picture what you would do. You know, there's no right or wrong answer to these questions. There's no right or wrong way to play this game. Eric Bischoff talked about, and if you can tell an emotional story, people will tune back in next week. People will buy your pay-per-view at the end of the year. But good luck doing that with the complications of human beings, their emotions, and economic incentives. And the purpose of this game, this thought experiment, is so that you can understand how hard it is to try to run a wrestling territory, especially in a competitive environment that used to exist and that is beginning right now as we speak. Next week, you will listen to me give you a podcast and talk about the week of pro wrestling, where I discuss the first time that pro wrestling's been on TNT in 19 years. And I'm going to tell you about it next week. So we're entering another era where territory wrestling is more relevant, and where these kinds of decisions and competitions are going to be happening on a daily basis amongst huge companies and on a much smaller basis amongst every other independent wrestling promotion really in the world. Thank you for tuning in to another week of the All Pro Wrestling 100 podcast. Next week is going to be a huge week in pro wrestling. We're going to have the season premiere of Monday Night Raw, where the new look Paul Heyman era fully kicks into effect, as well as the debut on TNT of AEW Dynamite. So, busy week in wrestling next week. Tune back in. This is All Pro Wrestling 100, where it is all pro wrestling and only pro wrestling. We're going to get crisper and sharper at this as we go. Episode 4 out of 100 plus. We get better as we go, folks. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.